It all began with a ridiculous promotion for flights to California, of all places. At least, that's what she thought until that email landed in her inbox at 7:12 a.m. with a subject line too enticing to ignore: sun, white wine, and a private pool. Just for me. How audacious. She showed it to Mark, her husband, with the expression of someone who had stumbled upon a shortcut to happiness, a remedy for their recent lack of conversation. He smiled, that knowing smile of a professor who approves of mediocre work because, well, effort counts. Book it, he said. So she did. Caroline was 29, working in tourism, which meant she spent half the year selling vacations to others and the other half trying to live one herself. Mark was 37, a university professor with a knack for observing the world as if it were a laboratory experiment. She had always found that sexy. But after they married, she discovered that being observed closely every day could be both tender and, at times, a bit cold. Don't get her wrong, she loved her husband. Yet lately, their relationship felt like a well-organized room that no one entered. They arrived at their rental house in a quiet neighborhood, whitewashed walls, blue doors, bougainvilleas climbing as if trying to peek into the lives of others. As she pushed open the gate, the air shifted. It smelled of salt, polished wood, and promise. Yes, wealthy houses had that specific scent of wrapped promises. A long pool stretched out, wicker chairs beckoned, and a teak table seemed to ask for wet glasses. Inside was a kitchen that made anyone feel like a chef just by placing down utensils. Mark set down their bags, scanned the living room with a critical eye, and handed her a glass. Your real vacation starts now. They toasted. The white wine had a crisp acidity that straightened her spine. She dashed to the bedroom to try on her new red bikini, daring and just the right amount of flattering. Over it, she wore a light white dress that let the sun guess more than it revealed. When she returned to the living room, she caught Mark looking at her as if he recognized an old landscape. You look beautiful, he said, and then fell silent. The compliment settled on her shoulders, but something was missing. Perhaps it was the urgency. They decided to walk to the beach. The sand was still warm, and she walked barefoot, inventorying small pleasures, free toes, salty hair, the trail of her dress in the wind. Mark walked beside her, hands in his pockets, discussing an article he needed to revise. She nodded, pretending to understand his fascination with footnotes when a deep, friendly voice interrupted from the right. I'm Jake, said the voice's owner. He wore an open linen shirt, sun-kissed skin that didn't need filters. He was watering the plants in the garden next door, and the water trickled lazily down his arm. Caroline felt like a tourist in her own skin as she watched a droplet disappear into his wrist. Mark introduced them with that smile he wore when things got interesting. Brief conversation ensued, where they were from, how long they'd been there, what they did. Jake was 33, an interior designer who had voluntarily exiled himself to California for the summer because the city was unbearable in August. They exchanged a few jokes about overly sunburned tourists. He laughed with his eyes, a knowing glint. If you need anything, just knock, he offered. Caroline thought that phrase could solve half the world's problems. They strolled back home slowly, and at the gate, Mark looked at her as if trying to decipher a language he had mastered. I liked him, she said neutrally, as if commenting on the wine. Me too, Mark replied. That was it. She had expected jealousy, some territorial comment. Instead, there was approval. She noted it like keeping a movie ticket that might become important later. That night, the barbecue crackled to life. Fresh fish, a salad she had concocted to impress the silence, grilled peaches, arugula, goat cheese. Mark was more relaxed now. He passed her the salt, tasted sauces, and casually brushed his arm against hers. Her white dress caught a bit of smoke and a lot of moonlight. Then something unexpected happened. Without consulting her, Mark lifted his phone and said, "Let me text Jake." A toast shouldn't be refused. She paused for a moment, speechless. Now he was nodding as he typed. She smiled as if it were nothing, but inside, a part of her was clapping, while another part felt guilty for doing so. She couldn't explain it. Perhaps it was just California working its magic, the chemistry of heat and bodies halfway to the water. Maybe it was that feeling of someone opening a window without asking. The fresh air was precisely what she needed. Jake arrived with a bottle of Sauvignon Blanc and an easy laugh. He greeted them, complimented the house as if praising its owners without saying so, and took a seat. Caroline realized her dress had a secret. The light from the patio cast shadows that looked like maps. He noticed too. His gaze shifted out of courtesy and returned out of curiosity, a back and forth that warmed her cheeks. Mark poured 3 glasses, discussing the local market, the fish of the day, and the less obvious beaches. This was the more charming version of him, the one she had fallen in love with, attentive, generous, guiding the conversation like someone driving a classic car down an empty road. She laughed more than she should have. Jake recounted stories about design projects, picky clients, and curtains that saved entire rooms. His hands spoke volumes, and she discovered she liked hands that communicated. The bottle emptied like an elevator without stops. Mark got up for another, and she noticed he filled his own glass with more enthusiasm. "It's vacation," he justified. She pointed at them playfully, pretending to be moral, and he winked at her, a rare gesture that always hit her in the gut. There was a moment when the night enveloped them. She didn't remember the exact phrase, just the sound of ice surrendering in the glass and Jake asking something about her work. She spoke about the invisible side of tourism, Excel sheets, imploding schedules, people wanting paradise with early check-ins. He listened with the kind of attention that beautiful people sometimes don't need to give. Mark observed not as a watchdog but as a host proud of the party he was throwing. Suddenly, a breeze lifted her dress. Just a little, almost nothing, just enough. Jake smiled without showing his teeth, a sidelong grin that seemed to say, "I saw, but I didn't see." When the clock decided to cross midnight, Mark went to the kitchen for water and returned with a glass and a vaguely dazed expression. "My head feels light," he confessed, amused. I offered him a chair. Jake declined, preferring the wide armchair. He found the right position and settled in, placing his glass on the table as if setting down a secret. "May I?" Jake asked, already holding the bottle, looking at her nearly empty glass. She nodded. The wine poured in, bringing with it a kind of shy certainty. The world felt slightly out of place, and for once, that didn't frighten her. They talked about music, about beaches at dawn, about the scent of skin after the sea. The word skin lingered in the air, like a kite with half its string cut. No one pulled it down. Mark, in the armchair, closed his eyes for a long moment. "Don't fall asleep," she teased. He replied with something that sounded like, "I'm listening," without moving a muscle. Only the soft sounds of laughter and the clinking of glasses filled the night. The sound of ice clinking in the glass filled the air as Jake leaned closer, his elbow resting on the table. "You look like you're enjoying the summer," he said softly, his voice low and inviting. She wasn't sure if he meant her mood, her dress, or something deeper that her body understood before her mind could catch up. In that moment, 2 simple truths dawned on her: she liked being seen, and Mark wasn't stopping it. In fact, he had been the one to light up the patio, to choose the jazz music that made the silences feel elegant, and to send the invitation that brought Jake to their table. "Don't ask me how I know," he had said earlier, "some intentions are as palpable as the salt on your tongue." As Jake prepared to leave, the night had deepened, and they both watched the door close behind him. Mark stretched, his back cracking as he stood up. "Good guy," he remarked, gathering the empty glasses. She followed him into the kitchen, a tired laugh escaping her lips. "You invited him just like that?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. He shrugged, rinsing a glass before handing it to her. "Sometimes, nothing is exactly where things begin," he replied, heading off to bed. She lingered on the patio, listening to the pool's gentle splashes and trying to calm her racing heart. If you asked her what she felt, she would say it was a delicious fear, like opening a window on a windy day and letting the house decide what falls to the floor. The air smelled of salt and something about to happen. Living by itineraries, she found herself without a map and enjoying it. Morning light streamed through the blinds like an uninvited guest. It was 8 o'clock, and Mark was already on the patio, engrossed in a thick book that only he could digest over breakfast. A cup of black coffee sat beside him, his serious expression reminiscent of a teacher grading an invisible thesis. She headed to the kitchen to prepare toast, her light hobby outfit hinting at the red bikini underneath. When she returned, he looked her up and down and simply said, "It's going to be hot today." She couldn't tell if he was referring to the weather or her. Deciding to walk to the beach, she grabbed her things. Mark said he preferred to stay and read, promising to join her later. She stepped out into the sun, the cotton dress clinging to her legs as she walked down the white street. The sand was still cool, the sea calm, and she relished the simple pleasure of walking barefoot, aimlessly. That's when she saw him. Jake was running along the water's edge, his toned torso glistening with sweat, black shorts hugging his body. The sun made his movements look like a high-end advertisement. When he spotted her, he slowed down, waved, and approached. Breathless but smiling, he greeted her, "Good morning, neighbor." The word neighbor felt intimate, as if they shared more than just a property line. "Mind if I join you?" he asked, and she nodded, feigning nonchalance while her heart raced. They spoke little at first, the sound of the waves filling the silences until he commented on her light dress. "It matches the red I saw yesterday," he said, and she blushed, realizing he was referring to her bikini. She laughed lightly, but the heat rushed to her cheeks. As they walked, her leg brushed against his, a mere distraction in the narrow path. She felt his warm skin against hers and didn't pull away. Neither did he. There was something dangerously instinctive about how their bodies responded before their minds could catch up. Looking back, she saw their house in the distance, Mark's silhouette on the patio, a book resting on his lap. His sunglasses hid his eyes, but she knew he was watching. He pretended not to wave, pretending to read, but she sensed he was aware. "Want to take a dip?" Jake asked, stopping at the water's edge. She hesitated but ultimately let her dress fall to the sand. The red bikini shone like a traffic signal. They dove in. The cold water bit at her first, then embraced her. When she resurfaced, hair plastered to her face, she found Jake's gaze fixed on her lips. The distance between them felt too small to be casual. They laughed, masking the tension of something that almost happened. Emerging from the water, they were dripping wet, and he offered her a towel. He wrapped it around her slowly, as if that simple gesture was a shared secret. The sun dried them, but the heat came from elsewhere. She returned home with her heart racing. Mark was no longer on the patio, she found him in the kitchen, calmly preparing orange juice. "Did you get some exercise?" he asked, glancing at her still damp legs. "A bit," she replied. He smiled, poured her a glass, and said, "You look radiant." In that moment, She realized the radiance he saw wasn't from the sun or the run, it was something else, something he seemed to have orchestrated. The afternoon dragged on slowly, the sun beating against the windows as if it wanted to join them for dinner. She spent hours flipping through travel magazines by the pool, but her mind was elsewhere. Each page seemed to hide Jake's face running on the beach, the towel wrapped around her body, that gaze locked on her as if she already belonged to him. Mark was mostly quiet, occasionally lifting his eyes from his computer to study her with a calm intensity, as if observing an experiment. She knew he had seen everything from the patio, the smiles, the closeness, the towel draped over her shoulders. But he said nothing. There was no jealousy, only anticipation. As the sun began to set, he closed his laptop, fetched 2 bottles of wine, and announced, "I'm inviting Jake over for dinner." She froze mid-motion, the magazine suspended in the air. It wasn't a question, it was a decision. She slipped into a light, peach-colored dress that hinted at her skin beneath. Gathering her hair into a loose bun, she let a few strands fall gracefully around her neck. Looking in the mirror, she realized she was preparing for a date, even though her husband was the host. At precisely 9 o'clock, the doorbell rang. Jake appeared with a wide smile and a bottle of red wine, wearing a light blue shirt with rolled-up sleeves, his sun-kissed skin still glowing. Mark greeted him like an old friend, a hearty laugh escaping as he clapped him on the shoulder. In the middle of it all, she felt like a secondary character everyone noticed first. They dined on the patio, the lights dimmed, candles flickering in the breeze. The grilled fish was perfect, but no one seemed interested in the food. They talked about travels, secret beaches, and the allure of Lisbon. She noticed Jake's gaze lingering on her more than it should have, and she could tell Mark noticed too. He didn't look away, instead, he poured more wine, asked questions that kept her talking, exposed, illuminated. After dessert, Mark chuckled and raised his glass. To vacations and pleasant surprises, he toasted, drinking more than he should in one gulp. She recognized that trick, it was his way of distancing himself without leaving. He set his glass down, leaned back in his chair, and closed his eyes. His head tilted to the side, surrendering to the alcohol, but she knew he never fully slept. Jake fell silent for a moment, looking at her, then at Mark, and back to her. There was a fire in his eyes that needed no words. She felt her body respond before her mind could catch up, trembling hands, short breaths. He reached out slowly, as if asking for permission, and touched her fingers. His warm skin against hers was a light touch, but it crackled with electricity. She could have pulled back. She didn't. "You look beautiful tonight," he murmured, his voice low, almost lost in the distant sound of the waves. She raised her glass to her lips to hide her blush, the wine burning her throat. The air was thick with tension as Carolina sat on the patio, the soft glow of candlelight flickering around her. She could feel the warmth of the summer night wrapping around her, but it was the intensity of Jake's gaze that truly ignited her senses. He leaned in closer, their shoulders brushing, and she caught a whiff of his cologne mixed with the salty breeze from the nearby ocean. Her heart raced, pounding in her chest as if it were trying to betray her. "Carolina," he said, his voice low and smooth, as if savoring her name like a fine wine. His fingers brushed against her arm, gliding over the fabric of her sundress, sending shivers down her spine. It was a simple touch, yet it felt electric, igniting something deep within her that she thought had long been dormant. She glanced over at Mark, who sat across the table, seemingly lost in thought, his eyes closed as if he were asleep. But the slight curve of his lips told a different story, a knowing smile that hinted at his awareness of the charged atmosphere. It was as if he was silently encouraging her, saying, "Go ahead." And then it happened. The kiss was sudden, like a summer storm, intense and unavoidable. Jake's lips found hers with an urgency that took her breath away. She melted into him, her body responding instinctively as his hands moved from her arm to the back of her neck, pulling her closer. The taste of wine mingled with the warmth of his breath, intoxicating her further. Carolina felt her legs tremble beneath the table, the world around them fading into a blur. The fabric of her dress felt too light, too revealing, as Jake's fingers traced the curve of her neck and slipped down to her bare shoulder, where the fabric had slipped away. She gasped, the sound escaping her lips before she could stop it, but the only response was the creaking of Mark's chair as he shifted slightly. She opened her eyes, startled, but Mark remained still, his head resting against his hand, a faint smile still playing on his lips. The kiss deepened, slow and deliberate, as if they were trying to savor every fleeting moment. Jake's hands explored her waist, moving down to her hips, and she felt a rush of warmth flood through her. She should have pulled away, should have remembered her vows, the boundaries she had promised to uphold. But a part of her, long hidden and dormant, was awakening in the candlelit night, right in front of her husband. A nervous laugh escaped her, half a sigh, half a confession. Jake pulled back slightly, his eyes searching hers. "Tell me you don't want this," he whispered, his breath warm against her skin. She opened her mouth to respond, but the words caught in her throat. She glanced at Mark again. He shifted again, but his eyes remained closed. This wasn't sleep, it was consent. She didn't say a word. Instead, she leaned back into Jake, kissing him deeper, surrendering to the moment. His hands tightened around her waist, drawing her closer, and the world shrank until it was just the two of them, wrapped in each other's warmth. The candles flickered in the soft breeze, the wine forgotten on the table. Carolina, 29 years old, a professional travel planner, was discovering a side of herself she had buried for too long. The wind had calmed, but the flames danced as if they were breathing in sync with her racing heart. Jake's hand was firm on her waist, as if he had found a place that belonged to him. Her body responded with an alarming ease, as if it had been waiting for this moment forever. Mark remained still, a statue of tranquility, but she could sense his awareness. The corner of his mouth twitched, a lazy, knowing smile that ignited her desire even more. Jake leaned in again, kissing the corner of her mouth before trailing down her neck, his touch sending waves of heat through her. She sighed, unable to contain the sound, and instinctively turned her head to glance at Mark. He was still there, unmoving, but his finger tapped rhythmically against the arm of his chair. It wasn't nervousness, it was a beat, marking the tempo of what was unfolding. "You're trembling," Jake murmured, his lips brushing against her ear. "It's not cold," she replied, her voice huskier than she intended. Jake smiled against her skin, and that smile was an invitation that she couldn't resist. His hand moved slowly up her thigh, cautious, as if testing forbidden waters. Every inch felt like fire, and her body surrendered before her mind could catch up. She didn't pull away, instead, she let him explore, feeling exposed not just because she was with another man, but because she was with him in front of her husband, who was watching. For a moment, she closed her eyes, wishing to erase the reality of the situation. But when she opened them, Jake was looking at her with raw intensity, and behind him, Mark remained still, his lips slightly parted as if he were holding his breath. Jake pulled her closer, their bodies merging into one, and the next kiss was more urgent, deeper, as if they were both starving for this connection. She felt her courage swell as she realized there were no breaks, no boundaries left to hold her back. Jake's hands traveled down her back, lifting the hem of her dress just enough to feel her bare skin beneath. A shiver coursed through her, knowing they were crossing a line, and Mark was just a few feet away, fully aware of every detail. She dared a glance at Mark, and for a fleeting second, she swore she saw his eyes flicker open, just a crack, as if he wanted to ensure she understood. He was there. He was watching. He accepted this. Turning back to Jake, she knew there were no more excuses, no more lines to draw. He kissed her again, their hands intertwining beneath the table, hidden yet so obvious. The night was alive with their unspoken desires, her breath hitching, the rhythm of Mark's finger tapping against the chair echoing in the silence. The world around them shrank until it was just the three of them, sharing a secret that didn't need to be voiced. Jake leaned in closer, his lips brushing against her ear. "If you want me to stop, I will." But she didn't respond. Instead, she tilted her head, offering him more space, more skin. That was her silent consent. The kiss that followed was deeper, more passionate, as if he understood her unspoken desires. She felt lost, but it was a sweet surrender, a feeling she hadn't experienced in far too long. It was as if she was exactly where Mark wanted her to be. In the midst of the whirlwind, she opened her eyes again. Mark had shifted, resting his head on his hand, but this time his eyes were open, partially hidden in the shadows. They locked onto hers, firm and unwavering. In that moment, everything clicked into place. He wasn't a spectator by chance, he was the architect of this scene. Her heart raced, but instead of retreating, she kissed Jake with more fervor, more abandon, knowing that Mark wanted this. The night continued, and she felt transformed, stepping into a new version of herself. As the kiss deepened, she felt a rush of emotions, fear, excitement, and a strange sense of liberation. The boundaries she had once held so tightly began to dissolve, and she surrendered to the moment. Jake's hands explored her body with a tenderness that made her feel alive, while Mark's presence lingered in the background, a silent witness to her awakening. When they finally pulled away, breathless and flushed, Jake's gaze held hers, a mix of desire and understanding. "Are you okay?" he asked softly, his voice barely above a whisper. She nodded, her heart racing, knowing that this was just the beginning of something she had never imagined. Mark's smile widened, and he raised his glass, a silent toast to the unexpected turn of events. "To new experiences," he said, his eyes glinting with mischief. She felt a thrill run through her, realizing that they were all in this together, exploring uncharted territories of their desires. In that moment, she understood that happiness wasn't just a destination, it was a journey they would embark on together, navigating the complexities of love and desire. And as she leaned back into Jake's embrace, she knew that she was ready to embrace whatever came next, hand in hand with both men who had opened her eyes to a world of possibilities. Subscribe to the channel,